Thank you, Lisa. I'm honored to address all of you gathered here today at this collection. And at the risk of stating the incredibly obvious to this group, I'd like to begin by saying how amazing it is to be here on campus. For most of my time at Swarthmore, I lived in the Ville in some form or another, either in Pittenger or in the Basin of Mary Lyon, or eventually in a house. Interestingly enough, given my current position, I lived in a house on Kenyon Avenue during my senior year. And because of this, during my time on campus, I walked thousands of times by the train station, through the underpass and steam tunnel, then rising up the ramp onto McGill Walk toward Parrish. And I made that walk again yesterday, and 25 years later, this process of emerging onto campus through the tunnel still feels magical, filling my mind with a sense of possibility and opportunity, and reigniting an optimistic and idealistic spirit. But while I'm incredibly honored to be speaking before you, I have to confess feeling a great deal of trepidation upon receiving the invitation. My 4 years at Swarthmore were deeply meaningful to me, so much so that the task of reflection and digestion of that experience has weighed heavily on my mind for weeks now. I found myself frozen, unsure of what to say, even up through the past couple of days, and actually, in complete honesty, up to the past couple of hours. Though I have to say this has enhanced my reunion experience in one key and somewhat unexpected way. Yesterday, freshly arrived on campus, I found myself sitting in an Adirondack chair on Parrish Beach, 80s music blasting, taking in the wonderful scenery, all with the full knowledge that I had an assignment due in the morning that was not yet done. Yes, it is indeed good to be back. When I arrived on campus in 1986 as a first-year student, I certainly had no idea that I would end up spending the next 29 years of my life on college campuses. But 4 years later, I'd already decided that my future would lead me to a career in higher education, ideally at a private liberal arts college. And that is where I've spent the past 20 years, experiencing college life from multiple perspectives: a faculty member, an administrator, and now, most recently, as a parent. Counting my time as a student, more than half my life has been spent on campuses of private small colleges. And while I hesitate to claim expertise, I certainly do have experience. Higher education in the United States is currently a topic of intense scrutiny and debate. Questions about the cost of 4 years of education, the effectiveness of college in preparing students for success, tension between classical education and the liberal arts tradition and more applied vocational routes. All of these are being actively debated in state legislatures across the country, among policymakers in Washington, in the media, and around dinner tables. The roles of the traditional liberal arts college and liberal education in general have come under particular scrutiny. Can a curriculum whose core is as ancient as the classical world still find relevance in an age of easy and rapid access to a vast amount of information, in a world that continues to shrink, in an environment where communication is rapid and in multimedia? A report in 2011 by the National Governors Association suggested that American higher education needs a revolution in order to counter the, quote, Gale-like market forces, rapid globalization, accelerating innovation, and relentless competition. At this time of rapid change, institutions must be driven less by internal customs and more by external awareness. Across the country, from Wisconsin to Texas to North Carolina, governors and state legislators are reforming state university systems not just to reduce cost, but to redirect the mission of higher education, emphasizing short-term economic impact over deeper mission and principle. Questions on the value and importance of colleges and universities due to the rise of new technologies and new economic forces are nothing new in the United States. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, some predicted the demise of the traditional college in the light of the development of reliable and relatively fast cross-country mail delivery that gave rise to the correspondence course, where specific content could be delivered to your door and consumed at home. Later, cable television and eventually the VCR gave rise to the video course in the 1970s, raising similar questions. And today, the availability of vast amounts of course content online has led some to hail the great unbundling of higher education in the 21st century. But is education merely a collection of experiences and content that can be consumed in isolation? For this question, I often fall back to one of the best descriptions of a complete education, a description penned by an 18-year-old Martin Luther King Jr. in an essay to the student newspaper at Morehouse. At the time, King wrote, "It seems to me that education has a twofold function to perform in the life of a person and in society. The one is utility and the other is culture. Education must enable a person to become more efficient, to achieve with increasing facility the legitimate goals of one's life, to train one for quick, effective thinking. Education must enable one to sift and weigh evidence, to discern the true from the false, the real from the unreal, the fact from the fiction. But education with efficiency, education which stops with efficiency, may prove to be the greatest menace to society. We must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. The complete education gives not only the powers of concentration, but worthy objectives upon which to concentrate. The broad education will transmit to one not only the accumulated knowledge of the race, but the accumulated experience of social living." King put it so well and succinctly. We do not and should not have to choose between an education of utility that prepares one for practical navigation of the world and an education of culture that enriches one's life and prepares one to engage as a responsible citizen. The complete education can and should do both. Our contemporary world is sometimes characterized by the catchphrase volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Challenges are often unexpected or unstable. Events lack predictability. Situations have many interconnected parts and variables, and causal relationships are often unclear. Political, social, and scientific problems are characterized by these four factors, from the Ebola epidemic in 2014 to the political and military crises in the Middle East to the challenges presented by climate change and global urbanization. Our success, not just as individuals, but more importantly, our collective success as global citizens, depends on solving these problems. And in turn, this depends on an education that empowers students to extrapolate and interpolate information in the face of ambiguity or uncertainty, the intellectual flexibility to adopt quickly in the face of volatility, and the analytical skills to untangle the interdependent variables brought on by complexity. Yet all of this focuses on the utility of an education. A complete education complements this utility with King's concept of culture and values. For problems like the Ebola epidemic, or global migration, or climate change are human problems, and solutions that are not only effective, but also humane, will be found by people who are equipped with empathy, with a deep understanding of cultural values, and with the sense of moral character that King advocated. It is not enough to develop a vaccine for Ebola, or even to develop a distribution system that can withstand political and social volatility. Rather, addressing this problem takes an understanding of human fear, pain, and suffering, a sense of compassion for others, and a determination to help despite overwhelming odds. Now, one word that comes to mind when I reflect on Swarthmore and Swarthmore's education is transformation. I was transformed by my experience here, professionally, intellectually, and personally. What makes a Swarthmore experience transformational? And more importantly, can we find lessons from the transformations that occur at Swarthmore that are generalizable and relevant to the larger debates on higher education? So let's begin by taking a step back from my first question, what makes a Swarthmore education transformational? And ask even more fundamentally, what do we mean by the idea of transformation? As a chemist, I often associate the act of transformation with the notion of a chemical reaction, one substance or substances changing into others. And we may gain some insight into the ways that an institution like Swarthmore changes the lives of its students by metaphorical exploration of how environment can bring about chemical changes in substances. The analysis of mechanisms of chemical reactions is a central theme that cuts across problems in chemistry. And my first insights into this field were developed not far from where we are now sitting. A friend told me, while we were consumed by the process of preparation for our honors exams, that I would never encounter a question or a problem in life that could not be answered, at least in part, by a basic description of chemical reaction dynamics and then invoking a potential energy diagram. Surprisingly, this advice has served me remarkably well in a wide range of situations. So why not try it here? So forgive me for a minute while I take a little bit of a detour into some basic chemical concepts. Drawing from thermodynamics, a chemical reaction can be described in terms of a substance moving from one energy state to another. A reaction is spontaneous and moves naturally forward when the initial state is higher in energy than the final state. Now, there are many reactions that are spontaneous, yet typically are not observed to occur on their own. This is because a reaction may be poised to move forward by thermodynamics, yet kinetically hindered. In other words, the reaction occurs so slowly that, by most casual measures, the substance is stuck in that initial state. Chemists describe this hindrance in terms of what we call an activation barrier. While the final state may be lower in energy, the pathway to the reaction requires the reactant to gain enough energy to get over a hill or barrier in order to reach that final state. A classic example of this is the reaction of hydrogen and oxygen to make water. This is a spontaneous process, but with a large activation barrier. So simply mixing hydrogen and oxygen without some boost to overcome this barrier results in no water. Now, reactions that are stuck behind a kinetic barrier can be moved forward by a catalyst. A catalyst increases the rate of a chemical transformation, reducing the barrier between the reactant and product. Now, there will be a quiz. There are two different aspects of the function of a catalyst that I think highlight some of the essential components of an excellent, complete education. The first is that catalysts act in part by bringing together particles that otherwise are unlikely to come into close proximity. In a simple picture, the first step in getting oxygen to react with hydrogen is to bring an oxygen molecule and a hydrogen molecule closer together. In this sense, Swarthmore, or any great educational institution, is a catalytic reactor, bringing together people who might not otherwise meet to this arboretum of a campus and building bonds among students and among students and faculty. My life was transformed by the people whom I met here. These include many members of the faculty, from Don Swear and Catherine Morgan to Bob Pasternak and Judy Vogt. I learned the appropriate pronunciation of angstrom from Bob Savage, had some of my first discussions about life in the academic world with Rick Eldridge and Chuck James, and found excitement in teaching and pedagogy in conversations with Lisa Smolyan. My interest in chemistry was developed not just by the fundamental appeal to the subject matter, but because Jim Hammonds took the time to write a kind and detailed message on my final exam in organic chemistry, a document that I keep in my office to this day. He also invited me and some classmates to his home for dinner, asked me to be a teaching assistant in his course the next semester. His connection and interest in me as a human being taught me that there's an essential human element to the world of teaching and scholarship, and allowed me to imagine myself in that position. Equally important were my connections with peers. Late night studying in the DuPont fishbowl showed me that learning could be an intensely collaborative activity. Late night discussions with friends in Tarbell, we reworked and improved democratic process in America, at least in our own minds, again and again. I came to Swarthmore as a kid from Cleveland who had not traveled much or often outside of Ohio. And in my first year, I lived in a hall with an RA from Pakistan, friends from South Africa, Texas, and New Jersey. I learned that New Yorkers fold their pizza and stand online and not in line. I heard my first reggae, ate my first Thai food, and engaged in passionate arguments about feminism and LGBT issues. I learned to listen, to empathize, to support, and be supported. Each and every one of these interactions not only opened up a bigger, broader world to me, they helped me to develop and strengthen my own identity. They catalyzed the progress forward to reaching my full potential as I moved through Swarthmore. A fundamental conclusion one can draw from our Swarthmore experience is that relationships matter as a part of education. This is not just true at small private residential institutions. Studies show consistently that human connections are an essential component to effective undergraduate education. This was emphasized in a 2014 study by Gallup, which found that some of the largest predictors of success of a college graduate, both professional and personal success, were having identified one or more mentors during the college experience and feeling that faculty members know the student as a person. Prioritizing relationships may come naturally at a place like Swarthmore, but it is not impossible in other contexts, even institutions serving commuters and adult learners, and even institutions with online or distance components. When considering higher education policy, we must prioritize the role of relationships and human connection. Education is not merely about efficiency in delivering content or credentialing experience. This means thinking creatively about technology and online learning, and it means faculty everywhere should be supported, evaluated, and compensated for the essential work of connecting with students. Now, a second component of catalysis, certainly a familiar part of all of us from Swarthmore, is stress. Catalysis works by raising the energy of a molecule to be transformed. This is the thermodynamic equivalent of deliberately making a molecule uncomfortable, challenging it out of its resting state. Similarly, challenge and discomfort are essential elements to a complete education. Here, texts and readings were inspiring and difficult, requiring us to return to them again and again, and it goes without saying they were also plentiful. Problem sets and homework assignments puzzled and frustrated. Seminar discussions pushed and challenged us to examine complex problems from multiple perspectives, to express ideas clearly and forcefully in writing and speech, and to critique and challenge the ideas of others. Yet challenge and stress came not just in the traditional classroom. Sites of transformation were everywhere, on the athletic fields and in the gym, in the various rooms, big, middle, and small, at Sharpless, in student organizations where leadership skills are developed and put into practice. Swarthmore has also been a leader at encouraging, supporting, and institutionalizing powerful learning experiences outside of the classroom. Community-based learning and research through the Lang Center for Civic and Social Responsibility, student-faculty research opportunities, and off-campus study. All of these experiences force students out of intellectual comfort zones, and these additional challenges and strains catalyze and move forward the education process. Rigorously challenging students inside and outside of the classroom, including practices such as community-based learning, is not limited to schools such as Swarthmore. What the Swarthmore experience demonstrates is the simple principle that education is about more than delivering content and more than collecting experiences. It's the interface of content and experience, coupling the exploration of ideas with the opportunity to put those ideas into practice, that is central to providing the full components of stress and strain required for transformative education. When one thinks of education as something that can be unbundled and recombined, like individual tracks on a customized iPod playlist, the rich, powerful power of this interface is lost. To paraphrase T.S. Eliot, it's possible to have the experience but miss the meaning. I learned a great deal from my collaborative work in Chester and Philadelphia while here at Swarthmore, but this learning was even deeper because I was able to integrate it into the context of my academic study. So my education at Swarthmore was transformational, and though I'm just guessing here, I believe this is probably true for many of you as well as for current students. I'd like to leave you with a closing thought and a charge. As debates around higher education rage around the country, we need to advocate for these principles of a complete excellent education for all students, not just the very few, under 4% of students, who have the opportunity to come to an institution such as Swarthmore. This includes an emphasis on these principles of educational transformation, human connection, and rigorous challenge for all students in a range of different institutions and contexts. Those of us at Swarthmore often state that this is an institution that should not be limited to the elite. We lament the cost and limited access, and the institution has long strived to address this head-on, committing resources to financial aid and recruiting students like me who would not have had the resources to attend without the availability of financial support. These efforts at Swarthmore must and will continue, and those of us who have benefited from this must support the institution's efforts with our philanthropy. But the advancement of this education must go beyond the effort to open access to opportunity here at Swarthmore. We must also engage in the debates in the public sphere, pushing for excellence in higher education across all institutions. A complete education that combines King's notion of utility and culture that will empower future generations to achieve individual and collective success, continuing transforming our society as it transforms individual lives. Thank you for your time, and enjoy the weekend.